Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here with my law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became, how do we as lawyers make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have Gary Mohr, former superintendent of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, with us to discuss Ohio's staggering prison population and other issues. Welcome, Gary.
It's good to be here, and when you're retired, it's kind of good to be remembered. So I appreciate that.
Jack, you know that I have developed a practice representing inmates on post-petition relief type issues. And one of the things when I was preparing to talk to Gary that came up in some of his remarks was how the mandatory sentencing affects how long these people spend behind the bars. And let me give you an example. So What we do many times is we will file a motion for judicial release. So somebody has served a few years, then go back to the judge and say, look, I've been good. I've been in prison. I haven't made any mistakes. I've taken these courses. Can I get out? And a lot of times the judges are very receptive to that, because if a person's supposed to spend, say, 7 years in prison and he's been in 3, then the judge can hang the other 4 over his head and say, I'll let you out on judicial release, but if you screw up, you're back in. The problem with mandatory minimum sentences is these people in prison can't take courses because there's no way they can get out early until the mandatory minimum is up. So I have a client that's got a 9-year mandatory minimum, 9 to 15-year sentence. He has to wait 9 years because it makes no difference if he takes a course or not. And it really becomes a problem for these people that want to better themselves, want to rehabilitate, but really there's no incentive. So all the courses and the resources go to the people that may have to get out. Did I get that right, Gary?
You're on point. And, think about this. Mandatory sentences are a big driver in the prison population. That and the drug laws. And I started my career July 1st, 1974, as a teacher, actually, at Marion Correctional Institution. And on the day I started, there were 8,400 Ohioans incarcerated in the prisons in Ohio, 8,400. I was appointed by Governor Kasich to be the director of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, and took the oath of office and started January 4th, 2011. And the day I took over, there was 51,000 Ohioans incarcerated in Ohio's prisons. That's over a 600% increase in the number of Ohioans in prisons. And I always ask people that have gray hair and were around in 1974, do you feel safer today based on the numbers, the 600% increase in prison population? Do you feel safer today than you did in 1974? And for those old enough, no one says, I feel safer today. So our effort in criminal justice in this state has been to expend an extraordinary billions of dollars to increase our prison population. And the public, who should be the customers of government, the drivers of it, don't feel better about it. And what we've done, to build on your point about programs, we do know what programs have a specific impact on behavior. And just, I won't talk too long about this, but during my career as director, I wanted to know if education, if drug treatment, if mental health programming, if cognitive programming made any difference at all. I wanted to know. So I called Dr. Latessa from the University of Cincinnati, who was recognized as a National Researcher of the Year by the American Correctional Association, came into Ohio's prisons for 3 years. He sent a team in for 3 years, went to every single prison that I had, looked at every program, and at the end of that work, came out with a statistical difference of taking these programs, specifically education, getting a GED, drug treatment program. For each program, he had a rate of reduced violence in prison and reduced recidivism. So we know these programs are having an effect on public safety in Ohio. So to pull all of this together, we've locked a lot of people up. We now have 3 times the number of laws on the books in Ohio that can send someone to prison than we had in 1974. And there was a sincere effort, and Jack, you probably remember this. When I was still director, there was a genuine effort by the Ohio legislature to do a recodification of the criminal code. And there were 23 of us on the panel. I believe 6 legislators, defense attorneys, prosecutors, old guys, corrections people like me, judges, spent a year and a half going through that, coming up with recommendations. In fact, I was on the group that looked at reforming the whole drug code. And actually the committee endorsed this entire package, and it went nowhere. It was introduced and died. And so, I don't know how much of an effort there really is to look at doing the right thing, the research-based focus on criminal justice. It gets to be more personal, I think, than driven by research.
I have to chuckle to myself when he talks about how many laws are on the books. In 1974, they came in, our civil rules, a lot of our court rules came into existence. And it used to be one small volume you could carry to court with you in your briefcase, and now it's 6 or 7 volumes of rules and regulations. But Gary, help me understand kind of your journey. So in 74, you started working in the prison. To 2011, you became director. Were you a prison guard? Were you a warden during that time?
So to answer your question, I've been warden or superintendent of 4 different facilities for a span of about 12 and a half of my years. I was a deputy director. I served with Governor Voinovich as the director of the Governor's Office of Criminal Justice, which was, I ate and gave a lot of speeches, right? And gave out a lot of money, but we did criminal justice research, which was important. But during that time, the Lucasville riot took place. April 11th, 1994. And after the resolution, if you remember, that was the longest span, that was the longest riot in the history of the United States in terms of days, 10 days. 10 people killed. At the conclusion of it, the governor asked me to go down and chair a committee to investigate the cause of the riot. I took 15 people down with me for 7.5 weeks. We wrote a very direct report on many things that caused that riot. And quite frankly, I continue to use that in my work today, and I certainly use that as director. So I did those things. I retired in 2002, believe it or not. In December of 2010, I got a call from the governor's office, Governor Kasich's office, saying, "Hey, would you be interested in being the Department of Corrections director?" And obviously I said, no. I'd done that. I'd been there. I wasn't interested. I got 2 more calls that week from them saying, "Wouldn't you rethink about it?" And I said, "No, I'm okay. My wife and I are happy." The 4th call came in that week and said, "Would you at least come talk to the governor?" He said he really wants to reform the correctional system and wants someone that can see his vision and just and make changes. I said, well, I'll talk to him about some people that I think might do it. So I went up and said, you only got 15 minutes. Well, the 15 minutes went to 3 hours. And John Kasich and I spent 3 hours together. Now, listen, I started at $2.64 an hour in 1974. And here I'm spending 3 hours with the governor. My good God. I mean, talk about being fortunate. But we talked, we argued, we debated. And it got down to the point he finally said, is your wife here? And I said, yeah, Linda's down at the other end of the hall drinking sodas. So he sends a suit down to bring Linda in the room, and he looked at Linda and he says, Linda, he made a fist. He says, Linda, I want him in this job, and we're going to do it his way. I took the job at that time. And he says, I'm making a fist because you're going to want to clobber me at some point because labor's going to be after him. The media is going to be after him. He's got to reduce the budget of the department. He wants to reduce the population. People are not going to like him at all. He's going to be all over the media in a very negative way, and you're going to want to clobber me. So I'm going to let you reach back and hit me now. He did not. But I took the job then, and John Kasich was true to his word, supporting me and the kind of initiatives that I thought were important.
Well, let me change the contour of the conversation a little, because the last few things you said, or the last few words you said, were very important. Prison reform. Now, you've just told us that the prison population increased from 8,400 to 51,000. That means either one, some staggering increase in crime, or we're just not doing what we need to do to reduce criminality and reduce the amount of time people spend in prison, or some combination. So what is it?
Well, I don't. Our state's population certainly did not increase in general from that time period. Ohio's been fairly stagnant.
No, but from 1971 to the time you retired, it did.
Well, it didn't increase 600%.
Hold on for a second. You said it went from 8,400.
Jack, I'm talking about the state's general population of 10 million people.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So we start there. So the population didn't increase.
Right.
We know, and I know you guys are astute enough to know that if you look at the federal crime index and those other indexes that talk about crime did not increase during that time period significantly. It didn't increase, actually. The laws increased, the number of laws increased, and the number of mandatory sentences increased, which drove, and particularly in the drug area. You got to think about Vietnam finishing up about in the early 70s, people coming back. These guys were disenfranchised. They were treated horribly. So, you had the drug laws come in and those things. But the thought was that the Department of Corrections, had the parole board that at one point was releasing people, making those decisions, was not doing a good job, was in fact endangering Ohioans because they were releasing people. So the sentencing structure changed. So we have many more, not just mandatory sentences, but determinate sentences, which takes the initiative, as you said, John, it takes the initiative away from people to get into programs that we know, based on the University of Cincinnati's study, makes a difference in reducing violence in prison and recidivism. It disincentivizes them to do that, and so the prison population starts to grow. And if you look every year or so, you look at special laws that are passed based on horrible situations, horrible violent incidents. We start creating laws named after people that tend to increase the catchment area of people and increase the time they spend. And I think this. I don't mean to get into politics, but the reality is, prosecutors are the key in the criminal justice system. And I know you guys are attorneys, but they're really the gatekeepers. They determine what people can get into diversion programs, et cetera. And it's not their fault, but how do they get elected? We as a public elect people based on percent of prosecutions, severity of sanctions. We don't evaluate people based on the right sentencing to be done or the right thing to be done based on what we know about research. It's a record. It's like a batting average, right, in baseball. And we as a public have bought into that. And so it's continued to do that. And my concern today, as we looked at Louisiana about 18 months ago with a governor's change, Louisiana was the number one incarcerated governmental agency in the world. It incarcerated more people in the world per capita than anyone else. And about 5 to 7 years ago, they came in with criminal justice reform, much like we did in Ohio, putting more money in the community, diverting nonviolent people, those things. Their crime rate went down. Their population significantly went down in the state of Louisiana. Their budget then to corrections went down, allowing more money to go to people earlier in their lives. A new governor comes in, convenes a special legislative hearing on these reforms, and they've been taken away. So I'm concerned that there's now even a greater trend or movement towards a more punitive model of criminal justice than a fairer model of criminal justice.
I think politics has a big role in it too, Gary, because, just my anecdotal experience, prosecutors are very aggressive in charging, in seeking long sentences. And the reason for that is, and I don't blame the prosecutors, that's an independent elected office. And when you're running for office, and if you want that job, you got to come across as being tough, right?
Right, that's right.
And then you combine that with the judge, who also needs to be elected. And that judge can't be letting somebody out of prison with the risk that person's going to hurt or kill somebody, and that will ruin that judge's chances for reelection. And, our representatives are responding to that by creating laws and like you said, making these mandatory minimums. I don't know how you reverse that trend, because people want to be in office and they're going to do whatever they think is best to get into office, not necessarily what's best once they're in office.
Well, and also they feed on sort of the primal fears of individuals. We are afraid of crime. We're afraid of criminals. It's the unwanted population. Let me take a segue here, Gary. As part of this prison ministry I'm part of, I navigated, that's the term we use, a fellow who had been behind the walls for 36 years. He murdered a man, right? Got out at 36, employed, doing just fine. And he's the kind of guy who, if you put a gun to his head, he wouldn't jaywalk, right? But I always thought, did he have to be in jail for 36 years? In prison? Would he have been okay at 30? Maybe 25? I just get the real sense there's no science behind the sentencing. Respond to that.
Well, I will tell you, and I'll refer you to a study that was done by Pepperdine University that actually looked, Jack, at that exact same issue of how much influence does the amount of time someone spends incarcerated have on future behavior. Now, to be honest, Jack, they were looking at individuals that were doing minor kinds of things, jail times off, so it didn't apply to murders, although I think it would apply greater to lifers. But what they found was the amount of time someone spends in an incarcerate setting has no impact on whether or not they're going to commit a future offense. None. and they looked at people that were doing 45 days compared to 10. And there was no difference in that future behavior. So I think that's an interesting piece. But I think John has pointed out, we now know, I didn't know in 1974, it felt good to be a teacher, it felt great. But we didn't know whether any of that stuff worked. We now have science behind, what works in prisons. And John, I don't know. I'll tell you, I don't know. I think you're right. I don't know how we can get across the importance of science and research on human behavior and when to release someone, because we now, Texas Christian University has a great set of science and research in terms of when someone is ready to be released, what the kind of almost a pre-test and post-test of them in terms of their readiness to be released. They've done some great work down there. So I don't know if it's going to be reversed or not. I don't know how it can be reversed. I think the only way, maybe if we get desperate enough, wasn't the city of Reynoldsburg, didn't they release 59 teachers recently?
For what? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Budget issues. There was a serious budget. My point is, you guys will figure that out. I think it was Reynoldsburg. It was a Columbus area.
Okay.
59 educators. Now, as the 59 educators are released, those, I've believed all along that money should be invested earlier in people's lives than at the end of the road, being in prison. What we know, guys, for nonviolent people, and there are still a lot of nonviolent people in our prisons. There are still a lot of them. For nonviolent individuals, putting them in a community corrections program is 1/3 the cost, because it costs a lot of money to watch someone sleep at night, right? 1/3 the cost and twice as effective at reducing future criminal activity than it is sending them to jail or prison.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the only way to spur change is to take the economic angle. And
I think it might be right now. Quite frankly, I've preached all over this, all speeches about 8,400 to 51,000. I've talked about that. I've talked about the tens of billions of dollars increase it's taken. We talk about staffing issues. I read, last a couple days ago about the significant staffing shortages in the Department of Youth Services and how that's impacting safety, et cetera. There's staffing issues all over this country. No wonder. My good God, how many more people does it take to watch a 600% increase in that? So, we've gone. I do consulting, and we've now done this work in jails as well. And it used to be capacity of systems was based on beds. How many beds do you have? More and more and more, we are citing the fact that the reality is you're only going to be able to hire and retain this number of people. So now, in addition to beds, it's about staffing you have available to do that. That very well may be an issue. It isn't. It's more of a driving issue in other states that I've seen and worked with. But that's the reality, and I just think I don't know. That's why I'm on the show with you guys is to hopefully stimulate some people to think about my tax dollars. How do I want my tax dollars spent? I don't feel safer today, and yet we're putting a lot of money in the criminal justice system at the end of the road, and my kids. The classroom ratio and my kids are continue to increase.
My guess is that you would not think that having private prisons is going to be the answer.
No, that's
it's just my guess.
Private prisons they take the people that are sentenced. It really is our sentencing system. It's the number of laws. I really wish, quite frankly, we have an opportunity to spur. We have if someone were to take the recodification recommendations that were made several years ago, take another look at those, we could reduce the population of the incarcerated people in our jails and prisons and invest in community programs that make a difference. That whole recodification program captured that and would create a significant savings, allowing us to push money earlier in people's lives.
Gary, I had a opportunity to attend a parole hearing for a client of mine, and I found the whole system, because it was the first time I'd done it, to be underwhelming. But what happened is he committed a murder when he was 17, and he was on his 30th year incarcerated. He'd gotten his degrees, he had learned some trades, he had learned music. He, for all intents and purposes, had done everything that he could do. And he was allowed to have counsel just because they had changed some rule or regulation that said if you committed a crime when you were minor, when you go through the process, you can have counsel. But having counsel just meant I got to sit in and listen, basically. But what tanked his release was his institutional record. And I don't know how this happens, but he was found to be drunk one day in prison, and that was on his institutional record. And they basically lectured him that, we told you last time you were here that everything looked good except you had to stay clean on your institutional record. And if you do, we will look favorable on that next time you're up. Well, here he is next time he's up. He's got a couple of little things in this drinking thing. And I just thought about that for a minute, because what he did on the outside wouldn't have been a problem at all.
Right.
But he broke a rule, and their basic position, from what I could tell, was if you can't follow the rules inside, how do we know you're going to follow them outside? And I thought, well, wait a minute. The whole reason we're here is because when he committed this crime 30 years ago, he was a minor. He had a different mental capacity. He's rehabilitated himself, and he lives in a community, and you're going to make mistakes. I was disgusted by the whole thing. And my other clients there are just like, well, look, it's his own damn fault. He knows the rules. He knows he has to play by them to get out. But I'm kind of curious. What are your thoughts on that? I think the parole board, at least my one experience with it, were really hard on him.
Well, the one thing, John, that you didn't mention, and I don't know whether it was a factor or not, and quite frankly, I believe that we should always take the victims of the crime into consideration. I think we should. But
let me add to that. The victim wrote a letter on his, I'm sorry, not the victim, he killed her father, wrote a letter on his behalf saying, I've forgiven him. He spent enough time in jail. And I think her position when I talked to her was just what we are saying here. There are too many people incarcerated and too many black men incarcerated. Yeah. 30 years is long enough.
Yeah, John, I can't. The one potential excuse that I would have given, you've taken away, because I do know that in many cases the voice of the victim is very, very significant, and it's often a silent one. Often it's not known. Their opinion is not necessarily known or not necessarily represented at the hearing, but it does it does play a pretty significant role. But in this case, obviously it didn't.
It was disappointing, but it lends me to ask you this, especially when you were teaching and then when you were a warden. I got to imagine you developed relationships with some of the inmates and could judge them on a real personal level. Do I have that right? Yeah,
absolutely. I still remember all the names of every person I had in the class 51 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because my limited contact with these inmates, and mostly it's the London Correctional Facility, you do develop a relationship with them. You get to know them on a personal level, and you start to think they would be just fine on the outside.
Let me just say this, and I'm going to be controversial just a minute. They are we. I believe God created all of us, and whatever God you believe, I believe that. I believe that people make mistakes. We haven't talked about it, but when I was growing up, I was headed to the juvenile system as someone behind the bars because I lost my mother and I didn't have any supervision. I thought I could raise myself, and I couldn't. So during every day during my 51 years, I think about, by the grace of God, there go I. And they're people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I think that when we start using the word like those and them and those people, I remember, we all remember, I guess, that phrase used against people of color back when Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were traveling around the South. We still call those people like they're totally different than us. I'm telling you, I spent 51 years in this business as a warden of the largest prison, a warden of a high security prison. I'm now currently the federal monitor in overseeing the highest security prison in Georgia. In fact, out of 90 people that went up for potential review out of that unit, 68 of them have killed someone after they've been in prison. Now, that's a reason to hold on to them. But I will tell you, I'm in that prison. I talk to them every time I make rounds. And just like you guys, you know, how you react to them and how you listen to them makes all the difference. But they're people. Mm-hmm. You know, the last person that Christ talked to on this earth was a criminal. He said, "I'll see you in heaven today," right? So, but yet we have a tendency to step aside and disregard that or something. I don't know.
You know, Gary, what you're talking about is something that is way beyond the ken of the average citizen, because it's almost, for lack of a better phrase, popular or soothing to hate criminals. I'm really glad you said they are us, because every time I go to Marion, and I'm at Marion once a month, I walk out of there. And by the way, a lot of these men have committed murders, right? Because they're in there for more than 20 years. So they weren't stealing from 7-Eleven. But every time I walk out of there, I go, man, put a pair of khakis and a polo shirt and on any one of these fellows and bring them to dinner. And whoever I'm with, they're going to say, hey, what a nice guy. He had something to say. But people, that's just beyond the ken of most people.
Yeah.
Well, and now we get to this point where it seems that the Trump administration can't wait to interpose the death penalty on some people in the federal system. And you just wonder, well, let me ask you this, Gary. You wrote the op-ed asking Biden to, I guess it would be commute the sentence of people on death row in the federal courts. Whatever happened with that? Did you get any response to it?
I sure did. I got a response that actually I had 3 meetings last year in the White House regarding this issue. I did not meet with the governor. I met with, or the president. I met with his top staff, and this was the Biden administration, and the vice president's staff, and told my story. You know, I executed 15 people in this state. And I mean, I did. Judge Frost in Columbus, God bless him, he's a good man, said, if we're going to continue executions, you as director are going to make every decision regarding an execution from 30 days before all the way through the end of the execution to disposal of everything. And so I was intimately involved and held accountable for temperatures of the drugs being maintained, the proper mixing of the drugs, to oversee that. I didn't do that. To ordering the drugs being placed in the system. So I told that story. I told the story. You know, I said I executed 15 people that were not the same 15 people that committed the offense. I don't know if you know this or not. I think Jack does. I did not execute anyone within 30 years of their offense. They're all 30 years or past. And I walked death row a lot as director. And I would see those guys helping other people learn to read. They had projects to help community service kind of projects that they were doing in the unit, in the death row. And I had death row. Death row was not a lockdown unit. It was separated from the rest of the prison, but the guys were out of their cells a lot. And I would walk those a lot, and I saw those people, and I guess I did because I knew my ultimate responsibility. But I don't want to get into all of this, but 10 minutes before they walked to the table to be executed, I went into their cells, and it was just me. And they weren't restrained. It was just me and them in their cells. Staff was outside the cells, but it was just me and them. And, what do you tell someone that you're about ready to kill? Well, I'm no theologian by any stretch, but I went to Matthew chapter 24, and I said, there's this farmer here, this guy that owns, and I didn't read it, I just told the story. I said, this farmer that has this land, and he had to harvest his crops, so he goes down to the town center at 6 o'clock in the morning and hires people and sends them out and says, go harvest my crops, I'll give you a fair wage. He did the same thing at 9 o'clock, he did the same thing at noon. He still needed more people, went back at 3 o'clock, and even at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he hired more people to send out there, said, go pick my crops. I'll give you a fair day's wage. Well, at 6 o'clock, he told the paymaster he brought him in, and he said, pay them. And people that worked from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and by the way, it was a very hot day, they said. 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, he gave them a full day's wage. So the people that started at 6 o'clock in the morning said, well, this is going to be great. Well, it wasn't. They got the same wage. Everyone did. And the people were angry that worked all day in the hot sun and got the same wage that somebody that worked at just an hour. And then I stopped there. I said, telling the stories probably helps me more than it does you. But I said, it tells me two things. Whatever God promises, you can count on. And secondly, it doesn't make any difference at any point in time, at what point in time in your life you accept that. Even at your last breath, it counts. You get what's promised. And not everyone, and I did this with Christians and Muslims and atheists. They all let me tell a story because it delayed their execution, I think. But many of them shook my hand and said, I'll see you on the other side. And I looked in their eyes and I believed that. And I don't know, quite frankly, Jack and John, I don't know how we got onto this now, but
I can see it pains you to even think about it. And I couldn't imagine being in that position. But the ultimate question was, what ended up happening with the Biden administration and this idea to commute
I'm
these?
Sorry, and this is important. Thank you, guys. So he commuted 27 individuals that were on death row from death to life without parole. Now, I think everybody would agree life without parole is not an easy sentence, right? Well, what's happened recently, and there's now litigation about this, and I'm probably going to get involved with this. This happens in Ohio. You get commuted from death row, and then within 2 or 3 days, we decide we move them to a general population place like a Lebanon or a Mansfield or something that's open and they can go to school and those kind of things. We do it. Have never had a problem, and that's common practice. What's happened currently, what is the current focus in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, is to gather those 27 up that have been scattered out, to gather them all back up and put them in federal ADX, which is the supermax of the federal prison, all solitary confinement, and put them back there as literally as punishment. I mean, that's all you can say. And there's an effort to do that, and there's litigation to try to stop that from happening. I don't know that's going to happen. I just, I can't understand it. And
How
I
many
can't understand it.
how many people could he have commuted their sentences? Because as I recall, there were more than just what you'd mentioned.
There's not many more,
Okay,
John.
good.
And I'm going to tell you, I believe there was in the 30s.
Okay.
So it was a vast majority of people. It was clearly a minority of people that he did not commute, but a vast majority he did. And I got a nice note saying, the president reviewed your op-ed. It had impact on him, and it had an influence on the decision. So I will feel good about that because, Jack, I still think about those 15. I think about the person off to my left when I was testifying against the use of these masks to execute people that had been on death row with an execution date. And I just pray that I haven't executed someone that was innocent of their offense.
Maybe the final comment. First of all, I can't imagine what that responsibility was like. I can't imagine what it was like to go home after you presided over an execution. Just beyond words. But one final thought, we talked about educating the Ohio population about the cost of over-incarcerating. But Gary, that's really a tough hill to climb because with another organization with which I'm involved in trying to repeal the death penalty, we bang home the message of the time and resources it takes to execute somebody. And there are a few prosecutors and the head of the Prosecuting Attorneys Association that will fall back on, we have to kill the worst of the worst. The numbers don't matter. I hate to say it, we like retribution.
I'll tell you, Jack, I didn't execute the worst of the worst.
Oh, well, yeah.
At Chillicothe, when I was warden at Chillicothe, there were over 900 lifers walking around in an open compound that had killed someone. And the individuals that received the death penalty did not necessarily commit more heinous crimes than those people walking around London or Chillicothe or some of these other compounds. So the comment about, and it is, you're right, Jack, it always, well, we've got to deal with the worst of the worst. Well, there's no scientific research approach to measure that. There's no metrics around that. It's all localized based on representation from the inmate, based on the prosecutor, based on whether an election's coming up, based on based on the local jury. It's all very, very localized, and we are executing the supreme sanction, executing people based on a very localized process that's not consistent.
Well, I think it's a slow process, but people like you, Gary, and Jim Petro that are coming out against the death penalty, maybe we get there someday, and more importantly, trying to find ways that people can pay their debt to society, but then also become productive members of society again. We thank you for your time. Very, very interesting conversation. I hope we get to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Gary, I'm delighted you were here. I always enjoy talking with you, and I appreciate the really good work that you're doing. Our thanks to WOSU and our sound engineer, Dalton Jones. If you like what you've heard, tell a friend, because we don't want it to be just us. We want it to be all of us. We'll be back in another week or two with another important social justice issue. Until then, so long.